Among the various supposed witnesses of the giant hairy man of the Northwest, or Bigfoot, we have accounts from people from all walks of life. There truly is a vast spectrum of sightings that range from locales and witnesses, some which are intriguing and some which are bordering on the absurd. Yet one type of report that always catches the attention are those made by the men and women of law enforcement. After all, they're trained professionals, usually not out looking for some strange, hairy ape man. So when they come forward with their own accounts, people tend to listen. So here's a selection of odd encounters with police officers in which they came across something that their training and experience didn't prepare them for. A very well-known Bigfoot report made by a police officer that made waves in its time occurred in August of 1976 in the rural area of Whitehall, New York. On this day, Officer Brian Gosselin was driving on the outskirts of town along a lonely stretch called Abear Road when he saw a massive, hairy, man-like creature with red eyes lumber out of the woods about 30 feet in front of him. Gosselin would describe it as standing 7 to 8 feet tall and weighing at least 400 pounds. He was so alarmed at what he was seeing, he reportedly got out of his car and trained his spotlight and his firearm on it. Yet, he was unable to shoot it. The strange beast, caught in the beam of the spotlight, issued an unearthly shriek before barreling off into the trees, leaving behind giant footprints in a nearby field. Over the next few days, other officers would apparently see the creature. Even Gosselin's father and brother would see it. Gosselin would eventually write his surreal experience in his 2018 book, Abear Road, The True Story. But this wouldn't end the strangeness in Whitehall, because in February of 1982, another police officer in the area named Dan Gordon and his partner had their own experience. The two had been on duty patrolling along Route 22, half a mile from East Bay at the base of Lake Champlain, when an 8-foot ape-like creature ran across the road and climbed right up a steep embankment to disappear into the brush. The creature was described as being a little different from a typical Bigfoot. It was long and lanky and had narrow shoulders rather than bulging with muscles. They also reported that it slouched heavily and had extremely long, thin, gangly arms, and it was remarkably fast and agile, far beyond any human's capabilities. Gordon allegedly got out of the car and tried to pursue the creature as the other officers sat frozen and terrified. But the beast was already long gone. The two would keep their experiences to themselves for years, only going public with it in 2003, after which Gordon was interviewed extensively for news stories and TV programs, including Monster Quest and Mysterious Encounters. The report also appeared in the book Bigfoot Encounters in New York and New England. Gordon was described as an incredibly honest and trustworthy man, and insisted on the veracity of what he saw, right up to his death in 2014. Although these are the reports that have perhaps been most covered in the news and discussed by cryptozoologists, there are actually many other such accounts given under oath by trained police personnel. From the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization's archives comes a report from 1970 in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. In the spring of that year, 2 police officers were called out to a home in the town of Marrero at approximately 9 p.m. on a report of a prowler by the terrified homeowner. The officers arrived at the scene and questioned the female homeowner, after which they did a perimeter sweep of the area, even calling in a canine unit. As soon as the dog arrived, it apparently went absolutely nuts. The dog became very agitated. It was cowering and was clearly scared of something. The officers circled around the darkened house with guns drawn, now convinced that there was a trespasser lurking about the property. But what they saw was beyond anything either of them had ever expected. As they rounded the edge of the house, they came upon a large, dark figure huddled against the side of the building. They could tell immediately that it wasn't a human because of its massive size. They reported that the creature was at least 8 feet tall, and it was very wide. As the creature fled, it took extremely large strides towards the street, where it passed under a streetlight, and both could see that it was covered in dark brown hair. They got a very good look at it while it was under the light, and then it bolted off towards a wooded marsh area near a canal and vanished. When interviewed by the BFRO investigator, the witness would say, "The incident with this entity was officially reported in the record system of that jurisdiction. I remember that we did not emphasize the subject beyond describing it as very tall and dark in color, with no specific description of any clothing, because it wasn't wearing any clothes. In those days, I had no idea what I was looking at. We told our superiors verbally what we had seen, and then it was dropped. We handled many unexplained incidents, as other police agencies do. The public just never knows about them. This is what I mentioned to you about going back 7 years later and not being able to find the reports. My partner died when he was just 37 years old, so we never had a chance to speak about anything again before he checked out. He was a quiet, no-nonsense guy who wasn't comfortable talking about a lot of the incidents that we handled, including the unexplainable ones. Another rather intriguing account from more modern years was reported on the North American Wood Ape Conservancy from an off-duty police officer who had a rather strange sighting in the area of Liberty County, Texas. He was traveling along at night on the Farm to Market Highway 1008 north of Kenneflick, and he was directly behind a big rig truck when a fleeting movement from the side of the road caught his attention. He says in his report, "I am a police officer. I was traveling northbound on FM 1008, and there was an 18-wheeler truck in front of me at the time, and we were traveling approximately 55 miles an hour. I observed a large creature in an upright position run out of the tree line on the east side of the highway. It ran in front of the big truck in front of me. The truck braked and swerved to the east side of the road, and the creature was unharmed and cleared the road and ran into the tree line on the west side of the FM 1008. From what I could see, this creature appeared to be as tall as the cab of the 18-wheeler, maybe 8 feet, and it was very bulky and covered in hair. I estimated the speed at which it was running to be about 35 miles an hour with extremely long strides. There are other police and fire service members in the Kenneflick area that have seen this creature, and I have personally heard numerous stories of other sightings. If I had not seen it firsthand, I would not have believed it myself." Investigator Daryl Collier would do an in-depth follow-up interview in this case with the witness and uncover some further details, of which he says, "It was the witness's perception that this figure was very tall and covered with grayish hair. The witness was certain that the figure was a biped and moved extremely fast, perhaps 30 to 35 miles per hour. The witness could not recall much in the way of detail. The event was estimated to have lasted only a few short seconds. The witness was impressed by the height of the figure. Using the cab of the 18-wheeler as a gauge, the witness estimated the subject's height to be possibly around 8 feet tall. Because of the figure's speed and overall size and height, and the fact that it nearly collided with an 18-wheeler, the witness categorically ruled out the possibility of a hoax. In retrospect, the witness wishes that he had slowed down or even stopped to get a second or better look. He also wishes that he had flagged down the big rig and somehow got the truck driver's perspective. However, the witness told me that what he saw greatly intimidated him at the time. He had absolutely no plans for stopping. He carried a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun with him, but the sidearm gave him little to no security after witnessing such an incident." From the following year, we have a report from the BFRO in the fall of 2003 from a Toronto police officer who had a very strange encounter while off-duty moose hunting near the small town of Searchmount, Ontario, Canada. In October of 2003, the witness was with his brother-in-law and they had just finished putting out a moose bait and issuing moose calls to draw in their prey at around 8 a.m. One of the animals did make an appearance, but displayed atypical behavior as if it were spooked by something. Indeed, the large bull moose ran off in apparent fear. He called his brother and they went about seeing if they could track the animal and draw it back in. The witness sprayed some moose in heat urine around to lure the animal back and sat down waiting for something to happen. At around 1:30 that afternoon, something certainly did happen, but this time it was no moose. The witness says, "At about 1:30 p.m., I started hearing heavy thumps behind me every now and then. Every time I heard one, I would turn around, but there was nothing there. I should mention that all this was happening while it was raining. The sound of the rain hitting the ground or the leaves was quite loud, but these thumps were much louder. They sounded like a stone or something heavy hitting the ground, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing. At about 5:25 p.m., I got off the ATV to stretch my legs and have a smoke. I put my gun on the front bag of the ATV to make sure that it was in arm's reach, and I stood in front of the ATV, facing the gully which prior to this had been in the rear of me. While I was having my smoke, I started hearing the distinctive sounds of footsteps coming from the gully, snapping branches and crunching leaves. I kept my eyes on the gully while I reached for my rifle. I thought the bull was coming back. But when I looked into the gully about 40 yards straight in front of me, I saw what I thought was a man walking towards me. He was stooped over and looked like he was having trouble walking in the bush. He grabbed a tree and swung himself around or ducked or dove under some thick brush. The total time this took was 3 to 5 seconds, and he disappeared. He looked to me as though he were dressed all in black, with a black balaclava or toque on his head. The reason I thought he was wearing a toque was that his head seemed to be long and black. It looked like it was wearing a jacket, and in the front of the jacket was open halfway, and I could see a different color of the lining showing around the neck. It looked like it was light gray or almost blue on the chest area, and it was in the shape of a V. I really couldn't say how tall it was because its legs were behind the thick brush, and I could only see to about the mid-thigh. But I would guess at the time that it was somewhere around 5'8" to 6 feet tall. But he was about 40 yards away, and it's hard to judge height and size in the brush when you're not sure of the distance. His arms seemed to be too long for a man, but he was extremely muscular, like a bodybuilder with a typical V-shaped build. There was definitely no fat on him at all. I could see all the different muscle groups on his upper body, and his arms were bulging out, and I could see that he had a washboard stomach. When he grabbed that tree, I saw that he had hands, not paws. He swung around that tree and dove for cover as if he were trying to hide from me. As I said, it was a dull day and it was raining and he looked wet. He was covered with black or dark brown hair, and it looked like the hair was stuck to him fairly closely because he was wet. What also gave me the impression of a bodybuilder was that he seemed to have no neck, or he had so much muscle on his shoulders that it gave that appearance. On top of all that, his shoulders were extremely broad. The witness watched this strange figure for a time, and he also noticed that whatever it was making a raspy coughing sound as it moved, and that it began issuing a long, hoarse, sad-sounding howl before disappearing into the wilderness. It was this howl that really got him thinking that he was witnessing something very bizarre, and he says, "When I first saw it, I thought it was a man lost in the bush. But my first thought was, why isn't he wearing any orange? And if he's lost, why didn't he just ask for help?" But that howl made me realize quickly that it was no man. The next thing going through my head was, what the hell was that? That was no moose. It definitely wasn't a wolf or a bear. It was like nothing I'd ever seen in my 35 years of hunting. What it looked like to me was a gorilla, or very close to one, but it walked upright, not on all fours. I stood there motionless for almost an hour and a half, waiting to see if it would show itself again. After a while, it started to dawn on me that what I had seen might be a Bigfoot, and I started to get a little scared. I normally leave the bush after dark when hunting, but this night, I left about an hour and a half prior to when I would normally leave to make sure that I had lots of time. I was going to go back to that area the next day looking for that bull, but I couldn't bring myself to go anywhere near that spot. That was the first time in 35 years that I'd been afraid in the bush. Since then, I've wondered if this thing I saw was what scared that bull away. Like I said earlier, I've seen many moose in the bush, and I've never seen one run from me like that. Interestingly, though, from where that bull ran off and to where I saw this creature was only about 50 yards. Another thing, and I don't know if this means anything or not, where I was sitting, I saw what was probably a moose bone laying on the ground about 5 feet from my ATV. It wasn't cut or sawed. It had been broken or snapped. It looked to me that it was at least a year old. I was supposed to sit there for the next 3 days and finish the hunt and wait for that big bull, but I didn't want to be there. I've never been that scared in the bush in my life. I never did bag that moose.